The Grow Ortho Podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. The views expressed by hosts and guests are their own and do not constitute financial, legal, or professional advice. Before making any financial decisions, you should consult with a licensed financial advisor who understands your unique situation. Neither the podcast nor its creators are liable for any actions taken based on the content shared.
Teresa and Erik, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Definitely. Teresa, tell listeners and viewers just a little bit about you and what you do.
So basically, I'm a wealth and retirement income strategist. I help clients mitigate taxes up front to have more money so they can build wealth, amplify their wealth, and have options that otherwise they wouldn't have. So that's the bottom line of what we do.
What about you?
Erik Nilssen. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. That's my day job. And a couple of years ago, we were involved in training our resident physicians and fellows for years. And so I sort of gravitated towards the entrepreneurial side of medicine and saw a vacuum, if you will, of physicians just lacking basic business knowledge and financial stuff. So I started teaching these things in my backyard, over a couple drinks and some campfires. And then that has since evolved into partnering up with a financial group and called Wealth DX, where we created a platform really trying to increase financial literacy for physicians and also having a fulfillment arm of that as well. And so it's been exciting. It's been great. And, we're sort of saving physicians one at a time.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I want to give you a shout out because I think we met maybe 10 years ago or so. You were the first doctor that we ever worked with. And so that was a really cool experience. And then you turned me on to a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
That was an amazing, looking back in history, That was an amazing time
fun
when we
times.
did. It was a fun time. And kudos to yourself for what you've been able to take from that and move on and build what you build.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.
I want to start by talking about the big problem and maybe get both of you to weigh in. Obviously, you both work with high net worth individuals. And what do you guys see, not only with the people who come to you, but just the landscape of high net worth, how they don't really think about the long game, right? So what's the big problem that you guys see with people who earn a lot of income, but they may not have a goal or outcome that is most useful for what they want to achieve to build and create wealth, especially generational?
It starts off with financial literacy. And in a sense, they're really financially illiterate. If you look at the healthcare education system in America, it's failing because it doesn't address what we're going to be talking about today. There are no financial classes. There's nothing about how to run a business, how to run your life. None of that is put in the educational model. It's all sort of science-based, which is important to becoming a doctor, but they're failing. I personally went to the 27th grade, and I never had a class on how to invest or why to invest or what does retirement really look like? How long are you going to work? Instead, it's you make nothing as a resident. You're broke. You have all this debt. And then one day you get a paycheck, which is more than you've made your entire life. And you look at this paycheck and go, wow. And then you start buying the goods and feeling good and lifestyle creep kicks up. And now you're stuck in this system. And so they say, well, I have a friend of a friend who's a financial advisor and just give your stuff to them and have them sort of navigate you to this path. And then you hope one day that when you're done, after it's too late, that there's enough money for you to retire on. I mean, that's a generalization, but I think it's a literacy issue. And you don't have to be a financial advisor, but you need to take some ownership and understand some basic fundamentals, which is what, I've been trying to spearhead, in sort of my side hustle outside of my practice.
Yeah. Teresa, what do you think?
I agree with all of that. I think it also begins with mindset, right? It's the financial literacy. And I think the financial literacy, the education has to begin in elementary school, right? At a very young age. because it's all programming, right? And we're just programmed to be consumers at a very, very young age, as opposed to thinking long term about what lifestyle do you want to live? What outcome do you want? Do you want to build a balance sheet with assets versus having a lifestyle that's all consumption? And so beginning with the mindset, I think, is very, very important. And then from the mindset, you can develop the education, as much education as you want or not want, right? And then building the team around you, because in the healthcare industry, my father was a doctor, grew up with doctors, know all about how they live and spend, and they are high income earners, but many times don't have that balance sheet because they're spenders, they're consumers. And they come out of school, they get married, the spouse expects a certain lifestyle, the kids expect a certain lifestyle. And so when they get to be in their 50s and 60s and want to retire or slow down, they've got a lifestyle they can no longer support. Yeah. They can't. The balance sheet doesn't support it. So it's starting, I think, super young. And for those who are already in their 30s and 40s and 50s, it's beginning the education for their kids, not to be consumer oriented, but to be asset oriented, right? And then for those in their 30s and 40s, making a decision about what's the long-term outcome they want. It's the what I call cathedral thinking. A mentor that we had was a forester, thinking very long-term, not thinking about today, tomorrow, the year. What is it that you want to create? And is it, for 100 years, which is a brand that I have, the 100-year lifestyle, right? What do you want to create over 100-year time span? What legacy do you want to leave? And if you're thinking from a long-term perspective, then it informs the decisions you make in the short term.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is awareness. And like you said, we're programmed consumers. And you may know through, your dad being a doctor and friends and peers, but certainly we have a lot of, we know a lot of the same people being in the community. Even, obviously we're here on the Grow Ortho podcast, work with a lot of orthodontists and dentists. And I can relate with it even myself. Some of this is neuroscience, and like you get the dopamine hit and you want to keep up with the Joneses. And like you said, you get the paycheck and now you can go buy the house or buy the car, but really you're not owning it. You're just making a payment. And we have so many people we've been in meetings with or talking with at dinner or a mastermind. And it's like, yeah, I need more patience because, I don't have enough income and I can't keep up with the bills and the beach house and the boat and the vacations and this. And one of the wealthiest people that I personally know, and I've spent a lot of time with, he's a doctor in Tennessee. He said, always live below your means. Well, that's not really exciting all of the time. And this guy did it for probably about 35 years. And now he has the biggest house I've ever seen, nice cars. And so now he's able to splurge, but he educated himself and he lived below his means for 35 years, drove a crappy van, not extravagant lifestyle. And it was really about the long game and planning. And I mean, this guy can do math in his head like no one I've ever seen. And we'll talk about the vehicles and different things that you can do to create wealth. But I thought that was really cool, just getting to know him. And he didn't buy into this consumer type lifestyle that everybody else buys into. And part of the problem is just short-term thinking. It's like, I'll be able to do this forever. Well, you can't. None of us are going to live forever. So some of this is kind of maybe thinking cradle to grave, like you're talking about the 100 years. I don't want to be morbid, but we'll all be dead relatively soon. So how are you planning long-term? That's the biggest issue I see just with people in general, is we all want everything right now.
Right. And I think that speaks to, I always visualize I tell people, like, imagine you have a bucket, right? Every one of us has a bucket, and that bucket has money in it. And unfortunately, most are trained to focus strictly on the inflow of, I got to see more patients and do more surgeries or do more cases to increase that bucket by putting more in. They never stop to look at the holes that are coming out of the bucket. And those holes are, we all pay taxes, we all have expenses. But again, there's also interest that we're paying to other outside facilities, which we'll get into later. But what is leaving your bucket? So, and a lot of people hopefully listening to this, ask yourself, can you really work harder than you're doing now? Yes, we can probably work harder, but is it safe and is it healthy to do that? So it's how can you be more efficient at what you're currently doing, but yet increase your wealth? And I believe what's often overlooked is what's leaving your bucket.
Yeah.
Which speaks to the short-term mindset of, I got to make more money so I can buy nicer things. It's a problem.
And when you're young, you do feel invincible. You feel like you can do anything and everything, and you can keep adding to, adding more patients, adding more centers, adding more businesses, right? But physically, biologically, hormonally, it's not true.
Right.
And it's fascinating from a hormonal perspective how we change so much as we age, right? One thing that was fascinating to me, my father, who was a urologist, doctor, loved his practice, loved his patients, and also was a bit of an entrepreneur and an investor. And he took risk with his money, had some home runs, had some losses. At 60, it was fascinating to observe from one day to the next. He said, I'm paying off all my real estate. I'm having zero debt. I'm just going to live on what I've got. And I was like, who is this man? Right? Who is this? And that taught me by observing him, wow, hormonally, and the older we get, the more risk averse we get. Let's have this all planned out before we get to that point, right? Because at 60, he was basically like, he didn't have the same energy and oomph, and he had more aversion to risk than ever. And I've seen that over and over and over again with my clients of working with them for decades.
Yeah.
It's real.
It is.
So if you think you're, in your 30s and 40s and you're invincible, that day will come where you'll look back and say, gosh, I wish I had more on my balance sheet. I wish I had more assets working for me instead of me trying to hustle, because you can't hustle forever. You just can't physically do that.
Very true.
Yeah. And looking at, I have this income now. How do I multiply the income versus how do I spend it into depreciating assets, to keep up with society or have these things? And we all know when you buy these things, I was this way when I started to get some money, is it's exciting for like a day. You go buy the watch and you're like, oh, this cool watch. And it's like the next day it's like, I don't need the watch. It's the same thing with cars. I know you had a lot of different cars and I got into Porsches, but it's like, it's not really that exciting. Like I have a beat up truck I could drive and be fine. And so part of it is kind of maybe going through that phase, but a lot of people don't realize this. They get stuck in that cycle. And then to your point, I want to ask you about physician burnout, because obviously as I can work harder, I can see more patients. And it's like, you can only do so much, and how have you seen physician burnout kind of take, obviously we hear this term, how does it take a toll, and what have you seen personally?
I would say that burnout right now is an epidemic, and it's in other fields as well, but in the healthcare specialty fields, there's papers out there. I believe it's as high as 80, 90% across the board. And what happens is burnout leads to what? Depression. And then depression leads to what? There's over 400 physician suicides a year.
Wow.
Never talked about. That's one a day. Staggering. And that is why I got into this years ago, to try to help physicians for that very reason, because that is a major problem. And the number 2 reason for burnout and depression is finance. So top 1% wage earners yet have financial problems. 50% of physicians work beyond 65 because they have to. Yet you've had at 65 a 30 plus year career and you have a financial problem. 50% of physicians have a net worth less than $2 million. You know, about 8% of physicians have a net worth over $5 million, yet you're a top 1% wage earner. That's a problem. So burnout, and again, systemically, we talked about that earlier, how it's failed us. Back in the day, you'd hang a shingle and make a living. Well, with insurance companies, right, you know, dropping reimbursements, cost of practices increasing. So overheads increasing, reimbursements are going down. That mathematical equation over time doesn't add up. And so, you know, salaries are going down. So putting all that together is now, with what we just talked about, creates this financial burden, which again leads to burnout and depression. But it's a major problem. I see it in my own practice. I see it with my partners. I see it. I felt it. I'll go ahead and on a record and say that I'm burned out. I am burned out. I mean, I'm tired. You know, I'm 51 years old. I've been practicing 16 years. I made changes. I work 3 days a week now. I'm a part-time physician. That's because I was smart with my money in the beginning and set up a system to combat all that. But if we don't get a hold of this, I think that what happens is, at least in my specialty, physicians get so burned out they give up and they just become an employed physician. I'm not here to dog employment, but like anything in life, there's a good balance. You want independent and you want employed physicians. You want both, because if we all become employed, you know, it becomes a stagnant system. Yeah.
And maybe I'll get your thoughts on this too, or both of y'all's, but specifically within orthodontics and dentistry, and we'll just talk about orthodontics. Residency programs are bigger than ever, but actual private practice is lower than ever before. You know, it used to be everybody went into private practice. This is probably this way with most doctors. Now it's very few, and the debt burden's anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, depending on, you know, where you go and what you do. And the people now are going employed with like these big DSOs or OSOs, and they're the ones who can offer all the jobs, and they can pay for it, you know, because it's almost like anything now with private equity. It's like, I think it was BlackRock said, you know, we want you to own nothing and be happy. But it's kind of true. And in small business, you see small business owners going away because private equity is buying everything up. So who has all the money to employ the physicians? And then when orthodontists can open their own practice, it's so expensive. Like you talked about, the rent's way higher. Even salaries with team members now are, you know, then attrition, and you lose people. You can't keep people. And so, you know, you go to work for a DSO. Maybe now you want to do your startup, but you still have to work at the DSO 1 or 2 days a week. Now you have more debt, but you have a little bit of income. And so it's just really hard to spread your wings and kind of fly as a private practice owner. And so you really have to be smarter or do more research than ever before, because the deck is just so stacked against you. You know, what do you guys see with working with clients and talking to people, just kind of what they're up against?
Well, it's exactly that.
Yeah.
It's you know, we're living in, the world has changed significantly. It's changed since when you started practicing, when my father was practicing, to today, those new doctors coming into the market, it's a completely different paradigm. And I don't think the mindset has changed too much.
No, they don't know. They don't realize until they're in it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a major problem, and their mindset has to come up to the realities of today, right? The profession and what it, you know, how lucrative the profession is today versus what it was before. I don't think it's the same. I think it's a totally different world. And they don't have the independence, especially when it comes to centralized medicine versus decentralized. At least with orthodontistry and dentistry, it's more decentralized. It's a cash practice, right? Where there's still an opportunity, I think, for them to make significant income, have control over their income, except those that are employed and in the system, right? So I think there's still opportunity for those who decide to go in private practice.
Yep.
But they need business coaching. They need financial coaching. They can't just think they're a technician, a really good trained technician, and they're going to figure out the business. They've got to come into it as a business owner with the business coaching, and they happen to be a technician.
That's exactly right. And the path that I have seen be the most successful, I've been doing this now for 11 years. It's crazy. We started working together, I guess, right around that time.
Yeah.
But it is the path of going to work in corporate, being smart with your money, doing the research, starting to make a plan, have a business plan, have a money plan, plan where your money goes, start making that money work for you. And people like, I'll give one reference to a doctor. I'm going to see her next week in Houston, Dr. Connect. She actually had built up a reserve and prepared for opening her own practice. Now she opened it in COVID, but she hired us. And in her first full year of practice, she did over $1 million, but she had a plan. She saved her money. She was very smart. Whereas the opposite is like you just kind of send it and go for it. And it's this half-baked idea. I just got off the phone with somebody yesterday and their collections are only about $10K a month, but their expenses are $24,000 a month. And so the plan wasn't there. And they hired everybody, they hired the consultant, they hired us. And unfortunately, we found this out kind of on the backside. But that's another thing too, is like when you're starting practice, again, kind of live below your means. What do you actually need? Do you need the most state-of-the-art equipment? In orthodontics, it's like brackets and wires. It can be simplified. And I get you may want all those bells and whistles eventually, but you really need to plan smart and grow into that, not have all that stuff on day one.
Yeah, I just want to add too, look what's driving some of these, we call them, new to the field. When we went to school, the medical education school debt is out of control as well. And I think that's what's driving that burden of having $500,000 to $700,000 in debt. I mean, my son's a sophomore at Auburn State School. He's an engineer there. We're out of state because we're Florida. It's $40,000 a year. It's a state school. I went to school there. It was $1,800 a year for tuition. Okay, my med school at USF was $12,000 a year. Tuition now at USF in Tampa is $45,000. I graduated in 2002. So in 23 years, the professors aren't getting paid more. So that's a whole nother issue. But my point is that's driving, I think, someone coming out, because I mean, we train fellows currently in our field, but when they come out, they're so, undergrad debt, med school debt, or, professional school debt is astronomical, and that they can't pay that back. Mm-hmm. I mean, try to get a house and a car and all that stuff. So they're looking for, hey, where can I get maybe the quick, safe money first? So I think it's driving them to this sort of employment safe haven, and they get caught in the system, and then there they go. Mm-hmm. Who has enough? Who's willing to take that risk at a young age to say, I'm going to go bet on myself and build this my way? Very few and far between.
Right.
And if you think about it, keeping the math super simple, right? A successful orthodontist, dentist can bring home $500,000 a year. If they allocate those resources properly and they do planning and they plug up the holes in the bucket that you were referring to, right? They mitigate taxes in the front end, and there are lots of really legit ways to do that. $500,000 in 10 years is $5 million. It's how is that $5 million allocated in a way to build the asset on the balance sheet, as opposed to the $5 million going to the cars and the houses and the consumerism trap, right? Even if they have $500,000 in debt or $700,000 in debt, the ortho and the dentist field can reward them financially where it can work.
Oh, yeah.
If they have a plan and they do it properly, where they could be out of debt and they can have the balance sheet working for them. But it's got to be done with a plan. It's got to be done with advisors that have their best interest at heart, right? And help guide them as to how they can set themselves up to be the exception and not the rule. And Erik, what I understand is that that's what you did, right?
Correct.
You were intentional about building your balance sheet as opposed to just having all that money be spent in stuff.
Right. I built I like the word system. I built a system that worked for me. And that system, I think it started really, I heard someone talk and they said, how do you build wealth? And that's where, the word life insurance came up and captive insurance. And I didn't know really much about either one of those topics. And that's when I delved into that. But in general, I built a model, a system, a process around taking taking my income, using that income to create other buckets of wealth. I maximized my investment strategies. I maximized tax deductions. My dad told me at a young age, it's not how much you make, it's how much you hang on to. And that stood with me since I was a kid. And, I'm not someone special or unique. I just took an interest in this. And that interest has paid off because, I'm 51 and I'm completely debt free. I don't have any debt at all. And I own everything.
And you have choices.
I got options and choices, and my kids have options, and now I'm just out to try to, how can I help other people, get to that point as well? Because I don't see a lot of people, you should be commended as well for what you're doing. It's amazing.
Yeah. And obviously we'll put a disclaimer on this episode, and this is all kind of opinion. We're not giving financial advice and all that. But I say all that to say is I do want to dive into what you guys see. Obviously, there's a lot of different things you can do. What are some of the vehicles that you guys see work best? And maybe we can even jump into your framework too. But Teresa, what do you see in terms of, okay, I'm getting income, and people listening to this show, they're not going to know. They're going to think, okay, are they talking about stocks? Are they talking about retirement? Like, do I go buy Bitcoin? That blew up recently. I wish I bought more.
Me too.
What do I do?
I always go back to mindset first, right? So it's first mindset. First, be very careful about who you marry or who you partner in life with, because that makes a huge difference, right, in life. People who have similar mindsets in terms of saving and investing and what they want for their future, right? So it's having a future common vision, right? Once you've got that in place and you've got intention around your finances, you have a plan around your finances, then comes, what do I do with that money? What strategies do I work with? And you said it very well. It's a system. There's strategies. It's not one product, right? A 401k can work well for someone. They can accumulate wealth for someone. And it's a good vehicle for accumulating wealth, right? At least that's what conventional wisdom tells us. But you're tying up your money for the majority of your working years, right? So you can't technically touch it until you're 59 and a half. So what other strategies are out there that allow you to access your money when you need it, allows you to systematically save, put money in reserve? I always use the financial pyramid, right? I talk about building the foundation first. When you have a solid foundation, just like a house, right? You're not going to build a house and have beautiful furniture and, window coverings, et cetera, if you don't have a great foundation. And for doctors especially, it's disability insurance, liability insurance. Are you structured properly from a business perspective, right? Like that foundation has to be so tight. So whatever happens, right, you can always go back to having that strong foundation. I happen to work with a specific life insurance strategy that helps clients save money for the long term, right? And with that strategy, when they want to open up a practice or want to invest in equipment for their practice or open up a second practice, they've got the reserves and they become their own source of financing, so they don't use a third party and pay interest to a third party. They're keeping that interest inside of their own system. Why are banks so wealthy? Why do they own the major real estate in every town, city, county, right? It's because they're making money on interest. Part of it. There are other reasons, but tax mitigation strategies, look at the bucket and say, where am I bleeding? How can I shift my system where I keep more of my money working for me? You talked about captive insurance. That can work in certain circumstances. If there's enough money and resources and net worth to make it, feasible. Those are just, some thoughts in that regard.
Yeah. What do you?
Yeah, that was great. I agree 100% with what she just said. And I would say that the biggest, so when you look at different financial products, I would just use the analogy of like golf clubs, whether you play golf or not. Each product's a club, and you look at Tiger Woods, as controversial as he is, but do you want Tiger Woods' club or do you want his swing? I want the swing. So that's what I want. We'll use a certain club for certain situations, but you really want the swing, which is the process and the system that we're talking about. So for me, the greatest impact, I think, on my financial wealth building was the unique ability to use cash value life insurance to create wealth. That's what in my system, that was what did it for me. And there's such a negative connotation about that. And I always tell people, hey, should I buy this property or should I do this? I always start off with, well, what's your goal? What is your intended use of that? What are you trying to accomplish? I'm not buying cash value life insurance really for the death benefit. I'm using it for the active cash value benefit of it, which is completely different than what people are used to hearing. So what I did is I bought a properly structured multiple policies that do have a death benefit for my family, but with certain companies, properly structured, I influxed lots of cash into this. And so what Teresa just talked about, I don't do what banks say, I do what they do, right? So banks tell you to, so Luke, you bring $10 to the bank and you drop off your $10 and deposit it. I walk in the next day and I need $5 to go buy a car. They give me $5 of your $10. They're paying you 1% interest on your deposit, and they're charging me 5% interest to borrow for the car. That's banking. So all I'm doing is I'm getting rid of banks. I have banks for my business and stuff, but I am my own banker. I'm the borrower and I'm the banker. I control the process. So for example, all my medical equipment in my practice, I didn't go to the bank and get a loan. I use my cash value life insurance, take money out of my cash value life insurance, and I use it to buy my equipment. And it's complicated, but the reality is this: it's the only financial product that I know where my money is working in two pockets at the same time. The life insurance company is giving me the money. It's just a lien against my life insurance. It's compounding uninterrupted as if it never came out. So it's growing, and I'm using a lien against it to now buy an asset that's going to make my practice money.
Mm-hmm.
So now, and I'm writing off the interest, and I'm also I'm taking a 179 deduction on that equipment for my practice. And now I'm creating a promissory note, and I'm deducting the interest that I'm paying back to myself. That is a system. That is a very powerful system. And I've done this for 13 years, and that's how I bought all my medical practices and built all that. Another example, living in Florida with hurricanes. We lost our homeowners insurance because we had defective PEX palliativity claims, but we lost our insurance. So the bank comes knocking. You owe $800,000, or we'll take the house, right? Because that's how it works. So, not everybody has the $800,000 to write a check. Here you go.
Right.
So I went to my cash value life insurance and I paid off the mortgage on my house. I just pay myself back when I want.
You had options.
I had options because I set this up a long time ago. So that's just one concept. But again, I get so tired of hearing, buy term insurance and invest the rest and whole life is, I mean, whole life is just a big term. There's many, many, many segments of that. And the purpose, how I use it, and that's how I teach that, is that system right there. Nobody can really argue with how that works. It's a beautiful system. It's worked well. And it's very powerful.
And part of that is starting, like you guys keep talking about, starting as young as you can, because there is a point where, like, if you're 65, whole life may not make sense.
Correct.
You got me into it, and I got my first policy, 10 years ago, and have the same type of thing where instead of using the bank's money, I just use my own money, or a lien against my money, and then I pay myself back or pay that lien back as I would like to.
Right.
And then you have control, versus freaking out and, man, I have this debt with the bank and, interest rates now are massive, So it is very interesting, and you don't hear a lot about this, and as good advice as Dave Ramsey gives, again, it's like just buy term and have some insurance in case something happens to you. But, why is the stigma so bad with whole life?
I think Dave Ramsey gives really good advice, but it's for the middle class.
Sure.
It's for the low to middle class,
for people who are on a very fixed income.
On a very fixed income.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, Wall Street. Wall Street controls so much of the financial literacy and education that's out there. And every dollar outside of the Wall Street system is less money that they have in their system for the Wall Street to make money, right? So I, not to wear the tinfoil hat, but I think it's completely from a Wall Street perspective. Wall Street owns a ton of cash value life insurance. Banks own more cash value life insurance than anybody else. So it's banks, it's a tier one asset. It's sitting in their balance sheets. They own billions and billions and billions of dollars of this. Then it's corporate, right? Corporate owned life insurance is a whole nother big player in this world. But you never hear Wall Street talking about it ever. So why is it demonized? I think it's, from the programming, advertisement, education perspective. And does it solve all the problems? Absolutely not. I go back to it's foundational. It gives you options. What you described in terms of how you borrow money and how you use it in your system, I explain it very simply. You've got a house, you've got equity in your home, you tap into the equity. If real estate values continue to go up, right? Even though you've tapped into the equity, it's uninterrupted compounding. Your real estate is still growing. But with the cash value life insurance, you don't have to qualify to access the equity. By nature of you owning the policy, you've got equity, you can tap into it, and you've got the benefit of the uninterrupted compounding. Forget needing it to pay off your house or to buy equipment. Just if you're going to invest, why would you have $1 going direct to an investment when you can have that same dollar dual purpose in two places? You run it through your policy first, take it out. The investment hopefully grows, maybe not, but then you've got that same dollar working for you in two places.
And in your case, it went and created more cash flow.
Oh yeah, it's really, like I said, I like it just working in two pockets. You have a same dollar working in two pockets, which is extremely powerful. And just to add more to that, yeah, I mean it's safe and secure. There's no risk of losing money in a properly structured policy. The market fluctuates, has no bearing on your.
And these companies are huge. People have heard of these companies, Mass Mutual, Guardian. Like it's
been
very
around for 100
safe.
years. Yeah.
100+ years, hundreds of years.
Yeah. And your cash value grows tax free. Very powerful. So it comes out as a loan tax free. So I mean it's and again, just the concept of recapturing, debt, interest, and expenses is just a new financial concept for people that have never really been talked about. And again, I think Dave Ramsey does a lot of good for a lot of people. And
for sure,
I like Dave Ramsey.
Yeah, I do too.
But I think he's not talking to people listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And so it's a different audience. And I've listened to his talks on this topic as well. And for as smart as he is and as good as he is, he really doesn't understand this either. And just full disclosure, it took me 2 years to read and understand sort of this concept that we're talking about.
Well, let's talk about that, because you both had the same mentor, I believe. And let's just zoom out before we get into the specifics. How important is finding a mentor?
It's everything, right? You don't know what you don't know. And intentionally looking for people that are smarter than you in areas where you have weaknesses or you have strengths or you just don't know. So many of us live in a box and we're unaware that we're living in a box, right? And so opening up the box and looking for teachers, coaches, mentors who can help us think differently or at least challenge our thinking, right? I think is so, so important.
It is. I think the biggest advice I can give to anybody listening to this is, we're all busy, but early in my career, I was looking for somebody. And I was always open to someone saying, hey, you want to grab lunch sometime? I want to talk to you. And I would listen. I did a lot of research on my own, but I would always give someone a chance because I didn't know this space, and I'm still learning this space. I'm not an expert. I know enough to be dangerous, but I mean, I think, and I found someone who was my mentor who, an older gentleman and who generally cared about my well-being and my success. He's since passed, but I think it's vitally important, and just to surround yourself with people that truly have your best interests. It's hard to find, it's hard to trust people, but I think it's important to talk to many, many people and find that either group of people or hone in on one or two. But yeah, mentorship is massive.
Yeah, and part of it is finding who do you want to emulate? Who do you see that, you would want to be like them in certain ways, maybe not in all ways, but specifically in this wealth creation, like who's done it, who's been there, who has a proven track record, and can I read their material? Can I go to their masterminds? Can I get private access? Mm-hmm. And then you just reverse engineer whatever your goal is and use that proven process, and it literally, you could take something that may take 20 or 30 years and you could figure out how to do it in a day.
And that's what's amazing about today, right? I mean, when I was growing up, I'd have to buy a book and many of the books weren't at the library or at the bookstore. I had to mail order the books to get information that was out of the mainstream, mm-hmm. right? And today, we have access to everything. And it begins with having a learner's mindset, right? Knowing that you don't know everything. And just beginning with that mindset and then finding mentors who challenge your way of thinking. And like you said, who has what I want? Who do I have to become, right? Or what do I have to do? And what are the systems that I have to put in place to get what I want, right? And I think we found someone from a philosophical worldview perspective. The gentleman that we're speaking of, what he was teaching was out of the box. Mm-hmm. I have a finance degree. I worked for a Wall Street firm during my undergrad and before I went to law school. Went to law school and really taught me how to think critically in law school, and I applied it to the world of finance. So when this mentor came around, my mind was already open and curious, and I challenged him many times because some of the stuff he was talking about was a little crazy, right? Crazy from the conventional perspective.
And they're upside down.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm. There is a problem with our system.
Who is this mentor specifically? And maybe we can, hear from each of you. What did he mean to you specifically?
So we're talking about Nilssen Nash. Mm-hmm. And I met Nilssen. I'm already an alternative thinker. I'm an out-of-the-box thinker. He was a little over the edge for me at that time, right?
No doubt.
But that's good. Yeah, that's
which is
good.
Great.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book that is esoteric. It was conceptual, and me analyzing the book and challenging him on, why did you write the book you did, and why haven't you updated it? But more than anything else, it was an alignment, and I think why I so was attracted to what he was teaching was I had a long-term I thought long term. I had a vision for my life very early on. I love the concept of cathedral thinking. You know, if we go back to thinking how cathedrals were built, right, in the medieval times, and how those that built cathedrals had to think 1,000 years out, right? If they were going to build this beautiful cathedral for generations to enjoy, what materials did they need to use? What design did they need to use? How beautiful would it need to be to attract people to come, right? So they thought everything out so intentionally over 1,000-year period of time, right? Which is why we enjoy so many amazing medieval cathedrals today, because they had that intention back then. Nilssen was a forester. He went to school to study forestry. Forestry is not get rich quick. It is thinking out and planning and literally planting seeds to enjoy the harvest decades to come.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got that. I related to that, you know, from a mindset perspective. And then the strategy that he, you know, promoted was the cash value life insurance and how to use it and become your own banker. It took a while to get, but once I got it, I shifted my entire practice and the work that I do with my clients as the foundation of the work that we do.
Yeah, I think, you know, my personal mentor, his mentor was Nilssen. And so he brought Nilssen to Pensacola, and we held a physician seminar with Nilssen, you know, on a Saturday or Friday night and Saturday and partial Sunday. And it was extremely powerful. And just personally, I've always, it's a cliche, but I really have kind of taken sort of the path, was encouraged, I think, from my parents and just genetically to try to take the path of less traveled. I always like to kind of just do things different, if you will. And so I've always been inquisitive in terms of how do things work? Can this be better? You know, like a systems guy. I'm a systems person. I like systems. And so that got me, when I saw this was a different concept and wasn't sort of mainstream, that caught my eye. And then I was intrigued by it. And so my mentor helped me with that. But I don't have really any financial background other than Google, you know, and just books that I've read, and then with my mentors and just experience. And I think number two is, you know, from a wisdom standpoint, you know, the best wisdom in life is the experiences that we have and experiences of others. And when I come across someone who has gray hair, I listen. They've been around, man, and they've seen it. And Nilssen has seen it. My mentor saw it. And I'm just attracted to older people because they have such a wealth of information, and you can tap into that resource. And I think that is something that I would encourage everyone to do, is to find someone as well that's seen it and been around. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of physicians, I don't want to get off topic, but a lot of doctors that I see too are so jaded now, and they're just so bitter and angry. And at the end of the day, you know, always provide more service than what you're paid for. You know, you're in a service industry, and I think you're in this role for a reason, to serve people and help people. So if you serve more people than, you know, you're paid for, that will always come around in the end to help you. And that's just a side note, but I wanted to get that out there and not forget that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's Jim Rohn said, the only way to get what you want is to help more people get what they want. You know, and so just culturally, it's not just doctors, but yeah, every day I have conversations and it's all about them. And I get it, because, you know, by design, one of man's flaw is to be pretty selfish. Mm-hmm. But the only way to grow and expand and actually build wealth is to be others focused. It's all about helping other people. And if you can just figure out how to help more people, you have a good product or a good system or a good service, it's a no-brainer. It sells itself, you know, but always be focused on helping people, because that's the only way to continue to grow and expand, whether it's money or, you know, helping more team members. You know, you can hire more team members, and then it's a win-win because you're helping more customers and you're also helping your own team expand. So yeah, I love that principle.
I want to add one thing too, and along the same lines, I think it's like Earl Nightingale, you become what you think about, right? And so in my partner meetings, it's a big, complaining session, always complaining. And it's important to read the journals, but, honestly, a lot of the science behind medicine isn't changing that much. We don't do things a lot different, even though we think we do, but we don't. So instead of reading 6 articles a week on the latest, greatest, procedure, why don't you spend 2 hours a week reading about some of the stuff we're talking about, like supplement that yourself. Because again, the tools are all available online. In fact, you can reach out to one of us to help you sort of guide you. But if they just spent, 2 hours a week learning a little bit about this, that's going to have a great impact in terms of, where you're at now. But you got to take some ownership in this, because all I hear is a lot of complaining, but no one ever just takes the time to learn a little bit about it.
And I can appreciate the disappointment that so many of these professionals have. I'm a lawyer by profession. I left the profession early on because it was not an energetic fit, even though I didn't have those words to
A lot of paperwork.
articulate. Well, no, in terms of the legal profession, just the energy in that profession wasn't a match. And there comes a time where I get you've got so much debt. You went to school for so long. You were at the top of your class for so long. And you had this idea that your life was going to be a certain way. And the reality is very different from the dream that you were sold. And I get there's disappointment there. And I get there's depression that comes from that, right? I totally get all that. But you're there. What are you going to do with it, right? And that's where taking responsibility and not having a victim mindset, but having an outcome mindset, taking control, and what are you going to do with what you've got in your life today, right? And what are you going to build from there? I think a lot of finance, a lot of decisions that people make with money is based on trauma and based on childhood. And once they heal, a lot of their emotional stuff, and being angry at the system and being angry with the man, right, is part of that anger, trauma, whatever. Once that's healed, I've seen such shifts and pivot in people's decisions when it comes to money.
That's interesting, Teresa. I've never thought of it that way, but I think you're right. You're spot on, because a lot of docs I talk to, when I talk about certain things, I talk about, hey, you're doing this, for your kids when they get older, and a lot of them, that's not my problem. I had to do it myself. And I'm like, gosh, what better gift than to help your kids as well? Your kids didn't ask to be here. It's just, I could never understand sort of the bitterness and anger, but you're right. They're bitter from maybe their parents didn't help them. So I'm not helping my kids. It's like, it's like my dad, it's like the gene pool's moving in the right direction. Why don't you change it? So
It is biblical. It is, I think, wired in our DNA to leave an inheritance and a financial inheritance. We leave an inheritance by nature of our DNA, right? But a financial inheritance, it is biblical to be able to do that. And those who believe counter to that are going against that. There's something off there. And what I found is that bitterness, that I was sold a lie. I've invested so much of my life into this lie, and the reality isn't there. Once that's healed, and I'm not saying it's easy to do, and there are very few who go down that road, I've seen amazing shifts and pivots.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about this because there are 2 different camps, right? And I was going to bring up, the biblical reference of, leaving an inheritance not only for your kids, but your kids' kids, right? But then you have, I think it was Carnegie or Rockefeller said the best thing that you could give your kids is poverty. Now, I think we all know the people who came up with nothing, and they're what you would call self-made, if that term can even totally be true, right? Because people help you. It's not like you did it all yourself, but you get what I'm saying. And I do think there is something to that, but I think why people may be attracted to that and, not giving my kids too much or not leaving a big inheritance or they need to go through what I went through is on the flip side, you see people spoiling their kids and their kids get everything and their kids have the silver spoon and they don't learn the same values. They don't have the virtue. They don't have the maybe morality, the discipline. And so I think that you can do that and leave an inheritance, and that is a noble thing. But you also have to be a good role model and a good parent. You can't just give your kids money and expect them to figure it out. I think that's the big problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was raised in a sort of an average middle class family. We didn't have the things that we have. I mean, we live on the water and have all these nice things.
Right. We
have 3 great kids and I have a wonderful wife. And again, the biggest decision of your life, in my opinion, is who you marry. And I made a great decision, and that's why I'm happy and I have good joy in my life because I have an amazing partner. With the 3 kids, yeah, we struggled in the beginning. How do we navigate this? And so I took a page out of Shaquille O'Neal's book and said, your mom and I are fine. You're not. That's his philosophy. You have to earn, your keep. So again, we do things like chores. They have their own bank accounts. They have their own life insurance policies. And I've taught them, of course, my other ones they're 12 and 14, but we have PowerPoint Sundays. So the books that I read, they make fun of me, but hey, it is what it is. We have discussions on attitude and goal setting and all that stuff on PowerPoints. We do it on Sundays. And so we instill these things in them. So they're going to, drive their own road and sail their own ship. But yeah, it's a joint effort. But yeah, I think that, are my kids spoiled? I'd say no. They do have opportunities, but they're taking advantage of those opportunities, and they know what they have, at least to the best of our abilities. But I think that's it's incredibly important to mentor, love, and guide your children because that's what they need, especially now. My 2 youngest are homeschooled, by the way, so yeah, we've yanked them out of school because it's just what we did.
Yeah. We were talking about that last night. What's your kind of philosophy around this and both sides, the poverty side and then the inheritance side?
So I'm a daughter of immigrants, right? My parents came over having to borrow a dime from a cop to make a phone call.
Wow.
Came over from Cuba in 1961. So
that's awesome.
They grew up with nothing, and they when they came to this country, they came with nothing and had to build everything up. And one of the fascinating things about, I believe, my childhood and what I was exposed to were all these immigrants, many of them doctors, who came over with nothing, having to build their lives when they came from middle income and high income backgrounds, and the struggle of the immigrant, right? And it so happened my father did well, and I never had to pay a dime for my education. And my education was very expensive, private undergrad, private law school, right? And everything that came from that. But I was a worker. I loved to work. Could I have been a spoiled child? I had nice things, but I worked my butt off. Now, I think there's something to be said for immigrants and children of immigrants, but for the rest of society. My son, right? My son, we intentionally parented not to have a spoiled child. We only had one child, couldn't have more. And my child had to work. My child at a young age had to come up with a business idea. He loved pets. He was a pet sitter. In high school, he chose not to do sports. And I said to him, you don't do sports, you're going to have to work because I'm not going to have basically a young adult sitting at home doing nothing.
Playing video games.
That was not my household at all. The lessons he learned working were amazing. And he loved entrepreneurship from an early age, I think because of everything he saw growing up at home. And when he was working at a restaurant, every night he'd come home and we'd talk about the sales and the revenue and the other employees. And so from that perspective, it was a lot of intentional parenting. Now, in general, how I guide my clients, look, it starts with the parenting, right? Having your children think they're going to inherit money, right, is not good mindset. The mindset has to start with, we're okay, you've got to build your life. Estate planning attorneys are very lazy. They operate with a template. I teach my clients, for your children, you want to make sure that there are things in the will, the trust, and your estate planning where they don't have access to the majority of the money until they're very old. If something were to happen to you younger, right? I wanted my son to be taken care of from a health perspective, an education perspective, or a welfare perspective, right? If he couldn't work for whatever reason that was legit, then the trust could take care of his minimal lifestyle needs, so he's not living on the street. But was he going to live wealthy without participating in society and working hard? Absolutely not. And so I worked with my estate planning team to set up trusts to represent my wishes. And their response was, you're trying to control him from the grave. And I said, no, I'm trying to protect him from the grave. Working with people and money, you see all sorts of things. And there are people that will inherit money in their 50s and 60s and still blow it. Imagine what a young person is going to do with that kind of inheritance at a young age. And I'll say one other thing, the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, right? The Rockefellers set up their estate planning in a way where even today, they're fabulously wealthy, right? Every member of that family. The Vanderbilts ran out of money in the third generation. There's no money.
They blew it all.
They blew it all. What did the Rockefellers do? They were very intentional about how the estate was set up. And no member of the estate could access the principal. They only could access a very small portion of the growth in the estate. And I think that's very smart planning. And they plan out for generations to come, not just for the next generation.
I was reading Sam Walton's biography, and the same kind of thing where they set up a family LLC. The family was kind of brought in as kids. They were non-voting, but they felt like they were part of the board, got to make decisions. I don't think they ever knew how much money was put away for them. You know, they're still the wealthiest family today, and they're all working. They're all contributing. They're all doing things. I think, you know, Sam Walton, if you read his book, he was just a normal guy, you know, worked his ass off. We'll talk more about that in a second, but, you know, drove the same pickup truck, Ford F-150, didn't live an extravagant lifestyle. And his kids saw that they were going to have to work, you know. And it's the same thing, you know, love or hate Trump. Like all of his kids, like they work, they do stuff, you know. They didn't have to probably, you know. Mm-hmm. But I think part of that is like in order to reap the reward, you're going to have to contribute to society. You can't just go live on a yacht somewhere. You know, the money's going to run out at some point.
And it's healthy.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's what we're made to do.
We're made to wake up with purpose. And trust fund babies or kids, adults, are really miserable people. They don't have purpose in their life. And their kids are disasters. That was not the vision I had for my child, right? Obviously not what you have for your children. So it takes intentional parenting and a plan. I go back to the 100-year vision, the cathedral thinking like a forester. What do you want your legacy to look like? What do you want the outcome, right? I wanted my son and his children and their children to benefit from the seed, but in a healthy way.
I'm working on this training, and I'm not saying to only do this, but the training, again, is going to be a little extreme. Only study dead people. Okay. And the thing that I like about it is, Sam Walton, you could say Truett Cathy, J.W. Marriott, there's all these people you could go study. Charlie Munger passed away recently. Soon Warren Buffett will probably follow. But the thing that I love about studying dead people, specifically business owners, is most of them didn't become successful until they were like 50 or 60. It's not like you go open a business and 2 years later you have all this money. But that is the problem that we're talking about. And that is the epidemic, certainly beyond orthodontics and dentistry, but specifically we're talking to that audience today. They come out and they get their first check and it's like, oh, I just made 30 grand or 15 grand or whatever it is that month, if they're working for a DSO or OSO, or maybe now they're an associate at a private practice. You're not rich. That may be good income, but how do you live below your means to build wealth, to emulate? And certainly, I don't think I'm going to be Warren Buffett. I don't think I'm going to have, $30 billion to give away and then make another 30 billion. But how can I emulate some of those behaviors where those guys had patience and gals? There's girls to study too, but they patiently waited and they thought long term, like this mentor you guys have of forestry and thinking 100 years. They didn't make rash decisions. I think it was Warren Buffett the other day that said, if it took me a decade to make a good deal, I'm totally fine with that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to vet the deal. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to study it. I'm going to run background checks on the people. Like I'm going to be very meticulous before I just, let's do business. And I think he said out of the hundreds of trades that he made, it was really like 5 or 6 that changed his life. It's like Thomas Edison. I failed 10,000 times, but the 10 times I was successful changed history. And so you don't have to do all these things. You can be patient and you can do some things like whole life. Maybe it makes sense to do a captive. Maybe you do have a 401k. It doesn't have to be this super complex thing. It can be simple, but it has to be the long game because your money only multiplies every 7.5 years or whatever. And so do the math. If you want to be set up at the end of the road, you have to be patient. Yeah.
And I mean, just full disclosure, I still have a 401k.
Yeah, I did too.
And I still have, some commercial real estate. I have all the things, but It's just, that's something that I, am really passionate about and it worked for me. But again, I think, like I teach my kids just in general, wealth gives you opportunities and it gives you discernment to discern, what you want to do with that. If I don't like I didn't like my environment with my group. So I went over here and built a building. I'm still in the group, but I don't have to see them every day. Mm-hmm. I can wear jeans to work, no one tells me what to wear. I can do what I want. And that is the freedoms to do that come with making smart decisions and taking some ownership in your life and your lifestyle and who you marry and how you want your practice to look. Again, I tell people, go to the dollar store, get a notebook and a pen. And I always ask people, hey, people complain. I always say, what do you want? And very few people can answer that question. What it is that you want. And I said, go to the dollar store, get a pen.
More patience, more money.
Yeah, and start writing down what it is that you want and then start getting, why do you want this? And just spend some time in solitude and asking these questions. And very few people do that. And I think that's, what Teresa's been touching on this whole time is those, the mindset and all that. And that's incredibly important. So that's,
I agree. Mindset's number 1, right? And then number 2 is, I call it rules-based decision-making. Have rules for your life. And based on the vision that you want, what's going to get you that vision, have rules around the activities that will get you to your vision. Have systems in place, atomic habits, right? It's not about having goals. You can have goals all day long. It means nothing. Have the systems in place to support the goals,
the
right?
discipline, the habits.
Discipline. Automatic millionaire. Why does that work? Because they have systems that every dollar that goes into the bank account, there's a certain percentage or a certain amount that automatically goes to another account, right? Where you don't see it. Well, as I train my clients to do, after 3 months of doing that, somehow the budget gets accommodated for that money that's going out, in many cases, not all. And a year from now, 2 years from now, you've got a bucket that it was somewhat effortless because the system supported the activity to have the outcome that they want. But it starts with the mindset. It starts with figuring out, what do you want? What's that vision? And doctors, the only way they can get through the hell that is the training and the education is by having a vision. And their vision is, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to be a doctor. But so many times it just stops there. What's the vision for the rest of their life? What's
Needs
the vision?
to go further. Yeah.
Needs to go further.
Well, I think it's this great letdown, right? Your whole for years, like for me, I wanted to be a doctor since I was in 9th grade. So I wrote this little note card and everything was geared towards that, a lot of focus and discipline, all that stuff. And then you get there and it's like after 2 years, I was like, now what? It was kind of like, I think that's lots of what a lot of these docs are struggling with is they get there and you're right. There's this, they've never thought about anything else like the hobbies and health and family. And it's a very unbalanced lifestyle. And I think that's where, where are they going to get this? Their administrator or partner's not saying, hey, by the way, I've noticed, when's the last time you took your wife or husband out, for dinner? They don't ask you that. There's no touchy-feely conversations, It's just, see patients, take care of people, and off you go.
And today, more so than 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I think everyone has more options and has more access to thinking outside of the box than ever, right? Yeah. 20 years ago when you got out, that was the track, right? That you had to go on. Today, turn on your computer or look at your phone. There's so many options, so many different ways of thinking if someone has a learner's mindset or an open mindset to consider, right? So I get the disappointment. I graduated from law school and I was in the grind, and energetically I realized, oh my gosh, I love the concept of law. I loved learning. I love thinking critically, but the grind of the profession and energetically not being a fit, and me who I'd become if I stayed in that DC litigation world, I thank my younger self that I said, this isn't what I want. And I stepped out. That was rare back then. That was in 1990. Women don't leave the legal profession in 1990, right? To go back to finance. Today, if you're a doctor and you go decide to open up, I don't know, a restaurant, who cares? Nobody cares, right? Society today is so open to all of that.
Well, Teresa, you're my favorite attorney I've ever met.
Aw, the non-practicing.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
I get it.
maybe, as we start to wrap up, is there anything missing that you think is really key for our listeners or viewers to know?
I think if you think you can just get in practice and keep your head down and not spend some time in some of the things we're talking about, I think you're going to have a very rough road and head down a dangerous path. Because I would tell you that 80% of the people listening to this, I'm sure, are burned out to some degree or more. So, like I said, I'm burned out. Everyone's burned out. Everyone's tired. So burnout and depression and then the suicide part is a very real deal. So, but I think if you just think you can just keep practicing and not have a grasp of various concepts that we've talked about, or at least seek that out, I think I would be very concerned for you. And so I think take this seriously. It is a journey, but I think it'll take you from, happiness is just a feeling of it's heading towards something, right? Happiness is kids running down this when you're a kid, running down the stairs to your Christmas tree because you're going to get presents. But by 2:00, the happiness is over because Christmas is over.
Yeah.
Right. We're talking about joy. You know, I mean, I'm full of joy. I love my lifestyle and I love what I do. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But a big part of it is I'm here on a Thursday when all my partners are operating or seeing patients right now. And I don't have to do that. So I think that's,
there can be a different path.
take a different path, take the road less traveled. You know, you don't have to be so different, but you need to take a different path because the current path is set up for you to fail.
It's set up for someone else.
Right.
The current path.
Yes.
You know, you are, I
You're
hate to use the
a pawn.
word, you're a pawn.
You're a
exactly.
pawn.
You're a pawn in somebody else's game. And one of my favorite memes, this goes a little political, but it's king and queen having dinner with another king and queen or having, you know, a meal. And they're sitting in this feast right next to the chessboard where all the pawns are bleeding and dead. We're all the pawn, right? One of the pawns. What I would add to that, it's all an inside job. No one is coming to save you.
That's true.
I get the disappointment. I get the bitterness. I get the depression. We've all been there. But no one's coming to save you. And understanding that it's an inside job, go seek help, go seek therapy, go seek mentorship, go seek a coach to help you see outside of the box that you're in, the prison that you're in. There's so much outside of that box. And if you decide to stay in your profession, that's great, but you can have a totally different experience in your profession. You know, the professions that we're talking about, that's someone else's dream. The opportunities you've got is somebody else's dream, right? If you just make a few tweaks where you feel like you're not the pawn, you're actually the master of your life. And you can set it up in that way. You don't have to leave. You don't have to go radical. But it all begins with, you know, the person inside.
Yeah. And we've all seen it happen. So not only with our own lives, but, you know, if we're talking about specifically with orthodontists and dentists or doctors, we've all seen what has to happen in order to do what we're talking about. And it's not anything crazy. It may feel overwhelming, but it's just like anything. How do you eat an elephant? You know, it's just one small bite at a time. And so it's got to be the long game. You've got to be patient, and it's just baby steps every day of doing something that's going to advance you closer to that goal. And it can be done. And I mean, it can be done in record time too. We're talking, you can change the trajectory of your life in a couple years.
Easily.
Yeah.
Jeff Olson's got a book, The Slight Edge, which is a great book. And it's all about making incremental changes and how it compounds over time. In the beginning, you don't see it, right? But the compounding effect. So The Slight Edge would be a book I'd recommend. Atomic Habits would be another one. The Infinite Banking Concept, Nilssen Nash would be another one.
Yeah, I mean, Gerber's E-Myth.
E-Myth. Great
Classic.
book.
It's
Classic.
awesome. I want to say one thing too. What changed my life a lot in my early practice was I always tell the young docs, think of your practice as a pie. And just as you carry on yourself through the day, when you pick up, you know, your instrument to use, you say, well, who owns this instrument? And can I own that instrument? Where am I practicing? Well, how much am I paying in rent? Maybe I could own the building. So you make a, you know, prescription. You write a prescription. I mean, the pharmaceuticals are making money off your prescription. The implant companies are making money off the things you buy. You know, everyone is sort of making money off, in the center of this pie is the physician. There's no x-rays taken unless you order it. There's no procedures done unless you do them. Nothing happens unless you do it. So you're the center of this whole operation where you're the pawn, everyone else is making money off you. So I went one by one and said, well, instead of renting the building, maybe I can own a building. Instead of, you know, sending x-rays over there, maybe I can own the x-ray machine. Instead of having PT over there, maybe I could own my own PT. Maybe I can own my own surgery center instead of them making all the money. And that sort of got me going and thinking, well, maybe I can do all this. And I think that, again, that's creating a system and a model, which to me, the rest is history. That's why the hospitals don't like me in this town, but it's okay.
I love that. Well, Teresa, if listeners, viewers want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
livingwealthyfinancial.com.
Perfect. What about you?
Just go to wealthdx.com.
Okay.
And that's my website.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. This was awesome. I learned a ton.
Enjoyed
Thank you
it.
so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great.